Hello, a very warm welcome to Fireside Chats. I am Magela Pillai, and today the subject for discussion is Parmat and Manmat, the words of men. In this series, we look at spirituality, how it impacts on your consciousness, what does this term, concept mean to you, and what is your relationship with God? Is He just a name or a concept, or do you have a meaningful and intimate connection with the Supreme Soul? I would like to introduce you to Sister Denise, who has been practicing Rajyoga Meditation for over 40 years. Sister Denise, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Tell me, Manmat and Parmat. Let's start. This is not English, is it? Which language are we speaking of?
These are Hindi or Sanskrit. It comes in both languages. And Manmat, you could say man means the mind. So the ideas, the beliefs, the perspectives that come from your own mind. And then Parmat, they are the ones that come from outside you. That which is not you is Par. It also means anything that's outside or even foreign. So what these two terms refer to is the ideologies that impact you as an individual and which guide how you live your life. And in an earlier episode, we talked about Shrimat. So if you look at these three kinds of mat, Shri, Par, and Man, Shri, of course, that which is the most elevated, which comes from God. Par, that which is not you. And by extension, we could say that which is also not God. And then Man, that which comes from your own mind. So it's to do with how a person decides what is moral and what is not moral, what is right and what is not right. How do you, make your moral choices? With what ethical policy do you run your life? So these are very important guiding principles.
Sister Denise, why does Manmat and Parmat have a kind of negative connotation to it, whereas Shrimat is, the word of God? And how does it impact negatively on one's life, these two terms?
We use them very much in the study of Raj Yoga according to the Brahmakumaris, so we're quite familiar with their use, but they may be quite very specific to this particular teaching, but they have far-reaching consequences, so it's worth looking at them. Historically, when the different religions were set up, they basically gave instructions to people how to relate to God and how to relate to your fellow human being, and then going further than that, how to relate with the natural world. The subject of human suffering and the question of law comes up here, because whenever anyone transgresses the natural laws or the social laws or the legal laws, then there is someone who is harmed by that transgression, and so it has to be redressed. So this term Parmat basically refers to the codes of conduct which were drawn up by the leaders in the society to help people to figure out what's right and what's wrong, what they should do, what they shouldn't do. Then this codicil is sort of conveyed into the society so that you have your external moral authorities, and they are parents, teachers, and religious leaders. So their function in a society is to convey these ideas to the new generation that's coming up, so that that new generation knows what are the right things and the wrong things to do in the context of that society. And it also informs the laws of that society and the norms of that society. This has worked relatively well for a few thousand years, but one of the things that we feel is that this is a time when God is very active. It's a time when the structures of society are showing signs of difficulty and in many cases falling apart. And what is coming up for discussion is that the moral principles and the way in which the external moral authorities are guiding the society, have they failed society? And my contention is perhaps they have, and in that case perhaps we really need to take a look at them. And then with this word Shrimat, which is the instructions of God, also in the equation, maybe we need to look at what are the differences between what God tells people and what humanity tells each other. I feel that we're at a time when God is accessible, personally accessible, in ways that perhaps were not possible in earlier times. And this coincides with a time when people are receiving, young people are receiving these messages, these codes of conduct from the external moral authorities, but that it has failed them. So we're at a point where there's a problem, and that the methods that have worked, the moral principles and systems that have worked for a long, long time, they're no longer working. Something's happened to make them no longer functional. And so that corresponds with a time when the Word of God becomes something that we need access to, and there is a clash between what God is saying and what the conventional moral authorities are saying. And if the generation, the young generations or the new generations are experiencing that they have been failed by this, then they don't go for it anymore. Or they may have gone for it and have internalized it and found that it causes an individual to damage themselves or sabotage themselves. And so we have a situation where we need to sort it out. So the way I look at it is that Parmat, the conventional morality, has been internalized by those young people who were taught this. And so the voice from inside is essentially the internalized version of the voice from outside. So one is not nearly as free as one thinks. Well, this is what my opinion is. Your opinion was shaped by something from the outside. So in order to really get your opinion, you find that, well, I don't really know. I need guidance. One of the important factors of God is a guide. So if you want guidance, you will turn your attention to God. And you may be really trying to figure out, okay, I need to formulate a personal ethical policy to lead my life because I'm not comfortable with conventional morality. It seems to not suit what my conscience is saying. And what I'm getting from my experience of God and my conscience seems to tally better than what I'm getting from the conventional wisdom. And so there you find yourself in a very difficult situation, a very uncomfortable situation where you need to just sit down with yourself and think, what is really right? Now, if your conscience is not working very well, you look to an outside moral authority. And that's the case for most people. Once a person starts to say, well, I'm not comfortable with the external moral authorities, I need to consult my conscience and start to listen to the voice of conscience, where previously you might have discarded it, then the voice of conscience starts to become more clear, louder, more refined, because you're consulting it all the time, you're giving it life. You're also, in your way, consulting God in your mind and trying to work out, because what you want to do as a human being is you want to perform right action. And as you start to know about the laws of karma, you're even more concerned to do right action because you want to have right result. So all of these things put you in a situation where you're kind of working only with your own resources. So that's a special position to be in. But I feel that it's very important because the world as we know it is no longer functioning with the stability and the solidity that it had been. And so all of these elements are coming together to say something completely new is arising, and the world as we know it is sort of fading away. And so we really need to figure out and to adopt, okay, what is my position in such a situation?
So Denise, how does one's own ego come into play in the scenario that you just described? Because it seems that at every juncture one should be making a choice this way or that way, but then your ego is omnipresent within. And when you are making a higher choice, as opposed to when you're traveling what is called the road less traveled, as opposed to being ordinary, there seems to be an internal dialogue. Does the internal dialogue become an internal battle as a result of ego?
I think that what happens when you start to operate more and more on the inner, or in the inner part of your being, your ego becomes a little easier for you to discern, because the ego is very much to do with your mask, and it is a reaction to external things. I think that what you find in the arena of the conventional moral authorities is you will discern quite a bit of ego there. And then where your own ego and that ego coincide, that's where your conscience gets discarded. And so you start to be able to discern things that may previously have been not discernible. And then you have to really think looking at the different choices that arise day to day, and really take responsibility and really look at, okay, if I do this, how is it going to play out? What's going to be the result? You try and calculate it. You see, the ego will say, well, we've always done it like this, so that's why we're going to do it like this. And then the conscience is going to say, well, I need evidence that it works. And the ego isn't able to provide convincing evidence. And so then the conscience will say, well, let me look, because you're not working for me adequately. So the ego gets reduced in its power when you start to operate this way.
So Denise, where does the heart come into play in all of this? Because for many, the choice between right and wrong need not necessarily be an intellectual decision. My gut feeling told me to take this road to work. today and not that road, and thank God, because there was an accident on the other road that I didn't take. So it's not a question of intellect for lots of people. It's a question of intuition. So my question is, the heart, when Parmat, Manmat, a heart, is there a heart in the picture?
I think there is a heart in the picture, and I think the heart and the conscience work together. You see, because if something is against your conscience, it's also going to be against your heart.
Okay.
The heart, in the purest sense, you see, because your heart means that you're coming from an angle of love, looking at whatever the situation is from that angle of love. So you're going to be quite concerned about the feelings of other people. And when you're making decisions, or when you want to, describe things verbally, you also want to make sure that you're not going to break somebody's heart or hurt somebody's heart. You also want to be right. There's an interesting phrase that is said, which is really helpful to help us work this out. And it is said that if you tell the truth with anger, it's no longer the truth. So that means that truth can remain truth when it also corresponds with love, you see. So that means it's a lot more subtle and delicate than people who are only coming it from an angle of the intellect, you can say. So for truth, for the right approach to be really right, you have to take into consideration, is it real, is it correct, is it sensitive, is it going to do any harm? All of these questions come in, and that is something that you have to do from the inside. You also realize you have to do it on a case-by-case basis, whereas the conventional laws or conventional morality tends to be more generalized, and it's never going to really quite fit the case in question. So you have to refer to your inner moral authority and follow that. And it may be that you take a course which is not what the conventional morality would have you do, but in order to be true to yourself, this is what you will do, and there that you may be at odds with the conventional morality.
So, Sister Denise, I like knowing how this applies on a practical level. Okay, so say if you're going about the ordinary course of your day, and you are inclined to dress in a certain way because that's what you want to do. And yet you're born into a culture that dresses in a different way. And then your conscience tells you, hold on, you should dress in neither of those, but you should dress in this way. How does one then come to a decision? You have your own preferences, and you have principles. Two things. Preferences and principles.
Yes.
Okay.
You're operating in a society which has preferences and principles. What's important is to sustain your relationship with that society. So there's a kind of rule of thumb. When it's a matter of principle, be firm. When it's a matter of preference, be flexible.
So say that again.
When it's a matter of principle, be firm. When it's a matter of preference, be flexible. Because principles are more important than preferences, ultimately. So you have a principle. Your principle is relationships with everyone should lead towards harmony. You have a preference. I want to dress a certain way, but all these other people find it offensive. So your preference is going to clash with their principle. Then you need to be flexible, you see. But you need to not kowtow. So it's quite a lot of...
sorry, you need to not?
Kowtow. You need to not, bow to everything everybody else wants.
Kowtow, okay, yes.
So you have to see that, if you insist on dressing a certain way, and everybody's going to be offended by that, then it's going to cost you. So you have to calculate what your preference is going to cost you and see if it's worth it, you see. And according to your calculation, you will make the adjustment, because what you need to do is don't pay so much unnecessarily just for a preference, There are people who say, I'm going to dress this way because it's my religion. And they'll say, okay, that's a principle. I have to dress this way. And then someone else will say, well, you can't dress that way because we have laws. And there's a clash between your religion and our laws. And that becomes very difficult. But there are places where that is going on. And so they have to deal with each other, because eventually it determines the relationship. And this type of thing is occurring in certain parts of the world, and there is kind of intractable. So what happens is you're going to be using an awful lot of time and energy and so on and so forth because of being fixed on this idea. And actually both of those are what I would call man-made ideas, because if you look at it in terms of a spiritual principle, the spiritual principle would say, well, modesty is a good thing. And there's a lot of different ways to describe modesty. Once you start getting excessive and extreme and causing somebody trouble, then you've gone way beyond the principle of modesty into a principle of oppression and tyranny, you see. And so there comes the human suffering, and there comes the intransigence, there comes the conflict. And the difficulty for people these days is that things are degenerating to that kind of situation quite a bit. And so the quality of life in the world today is getting reduced because of such things. So then what that means is that if you want to be able to operate in various different environments, you have to take into consideration the price you pay by not operating according to the norms, the conventional norms that are around you. And I mean, people can apply norms to do with external things, but not to do with how you think and how you feel. So your freedom to be gets limited to how you think and how you feel, which you keep, to yourself. And that is one of the tragedies of life at the present time. So I think that what we want to do is we want to find a way to live in this world in a way that is much more harmonious and flexible than a lot of the situations that we find at the moment, which are very rigid, very inflexible, and very harmful in general. But then we have to get through this.
Okay, Sister Denise, we have to say toodle-doo to you right now. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on what is a very vast and deep subject. So thank you. So there you go, brothers and sisters, the subject of Parmat and Manmat, the words of men. Sister Denise touched lightly on the subject because it deals with something that's very broad and runs and sits very deeply with people. At every point in our life, we have to make decisions regarding yourself, regarding your loved ones, regarding your responsibilities. And so Sister Denise has brought home the knowledge that we need to be very careful about the decisions we make, to understand that they've got consequences, and to also understand what it means to act in a manner that benefits you rather than harms you. A very deep and powerful message, and one that I hope will be of some use to you in your future. I do wish you everything of the best in your own spiritual quest. Thank you and goodbye.